I just went in really not thinking it was going to be that big of a deal. And we sat in the room waiting for my doctor, and he just came in, and it was like the first thing out of his mouth was like, it's cancer. And I could tell he was kind of shocked by it too. And by the way that he prefaced everything after my colonoscopy, he was just like reassuring me that like he really didn't think that that was going to be the outcome, especially because I'm like so young, which I feel like is a wrongful assumption that I think a lot of people have, that like cancer doesn't happen to young people. The primary symptom that ultimately led me to seeing a doctor was the lower abdominal pain. That was my first symptom, along with blood in my stool and losing my appetite. But the stomach pain just kept persisting, and for a while I was just waiting for it to go away, and then it didn't for like about a month. And then I just remember like telling a lot of my friends and family that I like was getting more concerned that this was going to be actually a serious problem, and a lot of people were just downplaying it and making it seem like I was being over dramatic. But it just kept persisting and got to a point where I was about to leave for college, and I didn't want to have to deal with any potential medical things, I guess, by myself at school. And so I was like, you know what, we'll just like see a doctor real quick before I leave. So he recommended me to a gastroenterologist, and then we immediately just scheduled a colonoscopy. So in the colonoscopy, they put the camera up inside my intestinal tract to take pictures, and the pain in my stomach was due to a mass where my small intestine met my large intestine. And it was about 4 centimeters when they found it. But it was that follow-up appointment that I was told that I had cancer from the biopsy. And I'm pretty sure they knew it was non-Hodgkin's, but they weren't sure specifically what kinds of non-Hodgkin's. I think because I was in such a state of denial, I was able to be a lot more lighthearted about it and make it seem like not as big of a deal, which I feel like I am kind of grateful for, because I feel like when breaking that kind of serious news, me being able to be more like positive about it was it helped them, I think, handle it a lot easier. But yeah, I don't know. I was just really like lighthearted and nonchalant about it, because at that point in time still I didn't really understand like how serious it was. And so when I would break the news, I broke it in a way that was like representing how I was feeling about it, if that makes sense. So I had 2 oncologists. I had one close to home that was through a different facility, I guess, versus the hospital that I went to in the city. But I had an aunt that previously had non-Hodgkin's, and so not non-Hodgkin's, she had lymphoma. And so we just knew that we wanted to go there because she went there. Once I got my diagnosis, it was like kind of 0 to 100 really fast. I met with my oncologist, and then I immediately was getting the bone marrow biopsy and the CT and PET scan, I believe. I found out the results with my first meeting with my oncologist in the city where I was going to be getting my treatment. And she said at that point that it was the tumor in my stomach. It was behind my right breastplate. Sorry. It was in my neck, and as well as in my ovaries. And she said she didn't like to stage them just because it is a blood cancer, but she said if she were to stage it, she would stage it as a stage 4. So from the bone marrow biopsy, I found out that it wasn't in my bones. And then the other places in my body, that was the only other places that it was like primarily located. So she was kind of describing how it was a mix between the two, which made it kind of irregular and not like a typical kind of non-Hodgkin's that they would see. And so at that point, they weren't sure on the treatment regimen that I was going to get. And I was going to be doing IVF, so they had a bit of time to like figure out exactly what they wanted to do moving forward. And she described it to me that the team of oncologists at the hospital were going to be looking at they were going to be looking at my case, I guess, and my type of cancer, and culminating together what they thought the best plan of action would be moving forward. After I met with my oncologist, they were concerned, since I was probably going to be getting a pretty strong chemo regimen, and me being as young as I was, for fertility in the future. So they wanted to start IVF prior to me starting treatment, and that started pretty promptly. Like within a few days afterwards, I started my IVF treatment. And then that lasted for 2 weeks, I want to say. So that consisted of, I want to say, about 3 shots every night in my arm, self-injection. And then it was every morning, if not every other morning, I would have to go to a fertility clinic and get an ultrasound to see how the progression of my ovaries were growing. So in the middle of my IVF, actually during one of my meetings with the fertility team, I was just, at that point, I was starting to get physically really sick pretty rapidly, and my tumor had actually doubled in size within the matter of like a week. And they could see how sick I was. I was in a wheelchair at that point, like I wasn't even able to walk. And so they were just concerned. They wanted to like stop the growing a little bit, but they didn't want to give me too much chemotherapy to where it would mess with my fertility, since the cancer was in my ovaries. And so that landed me in the hospital for, I want to say, like 4 or 5 days, and I was given Rituxan. And it's not uncommon for people to have a reaction to Rituxan, but I think in large part due to the tumor in my stomach. And at that point, my stomach was very full of cancerous fluid to where I looked like I was pregnant. I had a really bad reaction to it. And yeah. And also during that stay, I got my port put in. And then once I was released, I think I did the IVF for like 3 or 4 more days. And then I had the procedure. And then immediately after I had the procedure, I was admitted into the hospital to start chemotherapy. I actually had my port put in on my 20th birthday, but yeah, I think the worst part for me is just always the fasting, not being able to eat. But yeah, definitely a long waiting to get it done. And then when I went to go get the procedure, same thing, I was put under for it. So I didn't really feel any pain or discomfort, especially initially after. I think the port site pain or discomfort from the surgery was a few days after all the numbing wore off, and it was just like a little sore. But yeah, I had like a little birthday party in my room with like balloons and family and friends. So that definitely helped with getting my mind off of everything. I didn't think about the surgery too much. But like I said before, I was like kind of in denial about everything for a while. And so I feel like when all of these major events were happening, I just like didn't really see it as a big deal. I was just like, okay, like I have to go get surgery. Like, all right, like, I
Just
don't know.
another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still like, I guess, didn't understand at that point still, like, how serious everything was, and like fully like everything that I was going through, if that makes sense. So I had a part A and a part B to my regimen. So I would be hooked up to my IV for either 5 days at a time with the part A, or about 3 days at a time with the part B. Um, and yeah, they would run consistently, and I personally didn't really feel a lot of discomfort or side effects from the chemotherapy itself during treatment. I feel like I felt side effects the few days after finishing it. But yeah, the only thing I really noticed during my treatment was that I would get very, very hungry due to the prednisone, or sometimes would feel kind of nauseous to where I wouldn't want to eat. But in terms of side effects that I felt during the chemotherapy, that was about the only thing. I was on a lot of nausea medication when I was in the hospital, as well as a lot of pain medication kind of on the clock. So I think without that, I would have been a lot more nauseous due to the chemotherapy, or in more pain because of just everything in my stomach. But yeah, I was definitely given the medication to where I was able to be pretty comfortable given the situation in my hospital bed. So I would go to the hospital, and prior to me getting admitted, I would go and get my blood drawn by the staff, and then I would wait to get taken up to my room. And once I got into my hospital room, I would get kind of settled for a while, and it would normally take like a little bit, like a few hours for my chemotherapy to get ready. So I definitely had some settling in time when I would first get there. And um, sometimes they would like start me off with like some fluids beforehand. But yeah, it would take a few hours for my chemo to start. And then yeah, once I was on it, it was pretty continual until right when I was going to get released for the most part. At the beginning of my treatment, I was overall really physically sick in general. So I was just feeling very just fatigued and just not the best. And so the side effects, um, I was still like learning how to manage them. And so that point, it was a little bit challenging. But I think after I had a round under my belt, I had a better understanding of how to manage my nausea and everything. And I kind of knew how long it was going to take for me to fully reboot and get back to a better state. But after my third round of chemotherapy, aside from the first few days of nausea, which for me was my primary like side effect, was just a lot of nausea. After that, I was at a pretty good place physically to where I felt pretty good.
I just feel really nauseous and I have a really bad headache. So I think I might just try to like freaking take a nap and sleep it off or something.
So it was about a week before I was going to go in for my second round of chemotherapy, and it was in the shower. I saw just some hair falling out, but at that point, it wasn't heavily. It was just like the very beginning stages of it, but it looked like it was a little bit more than normal. And I anticipated that me losing my hair was going to be happening soon. So I kind of understood that that was the beginning of it. And for me, I thought that it would be a lot harder to progressively watch it fall out, especially because I had very long hair at that point. Um, and I found myself like avoiding brushing it for the first few days because I didn't want to see it fall out. And um, it was getting so close to my second um, round of chemotherapy that I didn't want to let it get to a point where I wanted to shave it and have to do that in the hospital, because I knew that was going to be a really emotional experience, and I wanted to be able to be home and have time to myself to feel all the emotions that come with that. So I ended up just wanting to put it in my own hands and just rip off the Band-Aid. And the first day that I went into the salon and had the intention of shaving my head, I actually did the cancer cut, as a lot of people call it, just like the blunt, short haircut, because I feel like it's a lot easier when your hair is a little bit shorter to lose it versus when it's long, just mentally as well as like physically, like the hair like shedding. And then I had that short hair for about a day, and then I just decided just to shave it all off, because although I didn't have control in the situation of losing my hair, at least I felt that that gave me some level of control of taking it in my own hands and shaving my head versus letting cancer let it completely fall out, if that makes sense. Oh, it was a hard experience for me, but I feel like being able to put that aspect of it in my own hands and be able to shave it myself made it a lot easier than I think it would have been, just kind of, like I said, ripping it off like a Band-Aid versus prolonging it and letting it fall out, which I feel like either option is totally fine. I know a lot of people choose to keep their hair and have it progressively fall out, but for me personally, I just knew that it was going to be a really hard thing for me to deal with, and so I would rather just put it into my own hands. So it wasn't until about my second or third round that I started to need to get blood and platelet transfusions. And I think it was around the same time, I think more so towards my third round of chemotherapy, was when after my rounds, I would tend to be neutropenic during that break and have to go back in the hospital and need blood transfusions and platelets. Because I feel like the progression of chemotherapy, it just like progressively gets a little bit more hard on your immune system, if that makes sense. So in the beginning, that wasn't too much of a concern. I feel like my immune system was able to bounce back a lot quicker um, during my times off between my chemotherapy. But yeah, for the last 3 cycles, for the gaps in between, I think for all of them, I definitely needed a blood and platelet transfusion, if not a few. And I would get that fever over 100.4 and have to be put back in the hospital because of being neutropenic. So definitely something that I face a lot more in my half of treatment. So I was given Neulasta right before I would like physically leave the hospital, and I would get blood counts taken twice a week during the 2 week gaps that I wasn't getting chemotherapy. So in total, 4 times before my next chemotherapy, just to monitor all my levels. And from that, we would get a good picture of when I would need to get blood or go to the hospital to be neutropenic. But the Neulasta for me personally would kick in about a week after. I noticed definitely more so towards the end of my treatment, it would take a little bit longer for the Neulasta to kick in and spike up my counts, which was the reason why I would have to go in the hospital more for being neutropenic, because I feel like your counts dropping is like inevitable in a way because of the chemotherapy. But Neulasta, I feel like a lot of the time is really good at bouncing it back up right away. But for me, it definitely took a little bit longer for it to kick in. And by the end, it was pretty painful. I think I maybe might have felt it a little bit in the middle of my treatment, but it was more so at the very end. And I believe they recommended Claritin to take, which helped in the beginning when it was minor, but my oncologist ended up just prescribing me a painkiller to help with it. I was going to be admitted into my 4th round of chemotherapy, and I was just talking with my oncologist, and she just like kind of brought up like being in remission, and we were like, wait, what? And she's like, oh, nobody told you? And we're like, yeah, no one has told us that yet. But yeah, it was, I had a good feeling at that point that the chemo was working and going along with the course, because I was, like, as you call it, like your good day, like your good weeks. I started to feel a lot physically better. And so I was like, like, I have a good feeling that it's working, but I definitely did not think that I was going to be in remission. It was very much a surprise, and definitely was just such a great surprise, especially to hear right before I was gonna go in for my hospitalization for chemotherapy, because as that progressed, it was a lot harder for me. Just being stuck in the hospital and isolated for a little bit of time, I kind of like didn't look forward to it too much. So I think that definitely lifted my spirits and helped me get through everything. So they quickly said that right after they said that I was in remission. They're like, although this is great news, we still want to finish your chemotherapy regimen. We don't want to stop right there. I think just to make sure and just do that extra layer of precaution, which, at that point, I was already like staying at home instead of being at school and stuff. And I figured, I already fought half this battle. Like, what's a few more months, just gotta keep on pushing and get through it. I think I would wish I knew more about the mental part of it all, because I feel like universally, like it's going to be a hard thing to go through physically, and I don't think I understood how much it would kind of affect me emotionally, I guess. And I feel like for myself personally, I feel like you want to be that really positive and strong person all the time and through your treatment, not only for yourself and for others. um, and I feel like especially with social media, like it's very easy for people just to post the happy pretty parts, which I'm victim of too, but I would always look at other people going through a similar situation, and it just appeared like they were handling a lot of things better than I was, and going through cancer, it's such an intense experience, that it's really hard to deal with expect yourself just to deal with a lot of that on your own. And so I think just me leaning on other people when I was feeling down, and just having that emotional support from other people, I think helped me a lot at my lowest points. Just, I think it is so important to advocate for yourself, because at the end of the day, it's your body, it's your life, and you're going to know your body better than anybody else. If I would have just listened to the people around me and haven't pushed, whether that be to see a doctor and ultimately get my diagnosis, or push to get this scan, I feel like I prevented a lot of situations that could have had a very different outcomes had I not advocated for myself.